9 years ago. Tell us about the motivation you had when you came here, and why out of all the countries around the world you chose Palestine, and why did you stay for all those years?
Yeah, I first came with a friend who does like multiple narrative tours, and I thought, why not? Especially because he was so knowledgeable and he's Palestinian, but they wanted to show us significant places, but from multiple perspectives. So I came, and the places that he exposed us to, I definitely was uneducated about and didn't know, and I think that that was something that stuck with me. So when I returned home, I started to look into ways of how to better understand, and then to be able to return and get involved. Yeah.
Usually people have previous impressions or previous images and stereotypes about the place or the people before they visit them. What impressions and images, thoughts did you have about Palestine and Palestinians before you came here, and how did that change when you really visited here?
Yeah, I think I was not as typical in terms of having an idea of what I would encounter, but there are definite perceptions that it's not safe, that people won't speak English, or that it's all desert. And then
camels.
and then you get here and realize people are the same everywhere. Of course, cultural differences and language, but in general, people want the same things, do the same things with their family, care in the same way for their kids, and so I think I didn't have to battle as much my own thought, but it was a lot of people, friends and family, that would say, "Oh, be careful, be safe." And I thought, oh, should I be concerned about my safety? I didn't really know one way or the other. So I didn't really have to shift that much of my own thoughts about it. But I definitely was aware of what, in general, Americans think about this place. And again, it's just that it's only holy sites, or it's only museums, or it's only desert. Yeah. And then you come to find that there's thriving cities and culture and life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when you came here, you worked and volunteered in refugee camps. We want to hear about this experience, and also tell us about the project for youth you had in the Hesha refugee camp.
So in 2011, I think the community center there was just opening up or being renovated in Hesha, and there was a group of kids that were given a grant to promote human rights for children, that among everything going on and what everybody faces under occupation, that children's rights within their homes are sometimes looked over. And so they wanted us to volunteer and go around with them in the camp and put up posters that they had printed. But in the meantime, they shared their lives and stories with us. And it was the first time I had ever been into a refugee camp. And to be honest, I didn't know that refugee camps existed here. Yeah. I didn't know in Bethlehem, of all places, that there were multiple refugee camps. And that experience alone shifted something within me, and hearing people's stories and them sharing what their daily life looks like was something that it broke me inside, and that's another reason why I continued to come back and want to learn more.
What do you mean? What exactly struck you about the refugee camp? Because people, might be watching us right now. They don't know what you're really talking about, like in terms of a refugee camp. Because refugee camps, usually we know about them, the tents, and so describe to people, to our audience, what is exactly a refugee camp and why it affected you.
I think refugee camp, the tents, is what comes to my mind, but walking through Hesha or Ida, and you see that it's no longer in tents. At one point it was, but 1948, and these are now generation upon generation that are in living conditions that, while yes, there's electricity or satellite TV, they're living on top of each other with not a lot of options, and very difficult to move out of. Really, it came down to there's not a lot of open space for children to play, and to just be kids. And I think everybody around the world relates to riding their bikes in the street, especially in America. It's what kids do. You go out and you meet your friends in the road and you play, and it's safe. And finding out that it not only is there not space for children to do that, but that it's not safe, especially when you add the presence of military. And that is something that for me crossed a line. I didn't know it was happening, and it's one thing when people are displaced and pushed out and in a camp, but for it to have gone on for so many generations now, and for the children to suffer, and their parents have suffered, and their grandparents have suffered, it was like a light went off, and I finally understood maybe a little bit better the tension that we only hear about the tension in the media in America, and not understanding what's happening on the ground. And so being in the refugee camp helped me understand that, and that I'm a firm believer that all children everywhere, regardless of who their parents are, should be able to freely play and live happy, innocent childhoods. And it didn't seem that wasn't an option, and that's unjust.
So you live in Jerusalem, and you talked about refugee camps in the West Bank. How do you compare both lives of Israelis in Jerusalem or Tel Aviv and people in the West Bank, specifically in refugee camps?
It is a bit of, it's an odd feeling sometimes. I remember last summer being in a cafe and posting on Instagram, and my friends saying, "Oh, it's so pretty there, it's so lovely." And part of me thought, oh, but 10 kilometers away, there's thousands of refugees that don't have the option to come to Jerusalem. And I'm well aware of the people that aren't allowed, and that I am. And I'm not from here, and I get to go wherever I want. The freedom that exists of movement for outsiders adds a layer of injustice, and I feel it and I'm aware of it. But it's very easy for people to come and visit and not be aware of it, because you're behind a wall. You're kept away from it, and so it's very easy. And I've had friends that have visited, and they, when I showed them my pictures, being in Dahasha or anywhere in Ramallah, where were you? I never saw this. Where's the wall? There are people who can come here and never see it, and they think that they've experienced it. I will say the dynamic is interesting between Bethlehem and Jerusalem. For me, I felt safer in Bethlehem. I felt, in a way, being separated from soldiers walking with guns. It's very shocking to see people getting on public transportation with guns everywhere. It's shocking and it's jarring. And so going into the West Bank, even though I have to cross through the checkpoint, in a way it feels safer and a closer community, because it is separated a little bit.
But in general, Celia, we talked about a smaller picture of the occupation, life under occupation, refugee camps. But in general, how do you describe Palestinians' life under Israeli occupation to those who have never been here?
Yeah, it's hard. I like to tell people individual stories. I cannot begin to imagine what it actually is like and what it feels like. I can observe. I have made my friends go through checkpoints at 3 a.m. just to see what does it look like at checkpoint 300 at 4 a.m. when thousands of people are trying to get to work. What does the daily frustration look like and feel like, and we can have a little bit of that, but I haven't lived my whole life under it. All I have to do is flash my passport and I can get waved through. And so I try and expose people as much to the reality, talking about the water being cut off or lack of access to basic garbage pickup, how frustrating it can be for having a permit and then getting denied at the checkpoint. Those little frustrations I like to point out to friends, because we understand it. All people understand when you're sitting in traffic how frustrating it is. Everybody yells. Everybody around the world hates traffic. But if it's traffic for no reason, just because somebody like wants to chit-chat with their friend and not let the next car through for 20 minutes, people understand that on a human level. And so telling those human stories, and of course focusing on things like education and healthcare and children, to me those things aren't political. They shouldn't be. Children's safety and their well-being and families' well-being, access to hospitals, these are basic human rights.
To you, Celia, when you moved here, did you have any cultural shock, or did you, anything you viewed as a strange, or anything struck you about life here?
I think the first time I came here, there are little things that are shocks, but almost in a reverse way. I didn't expect so many people to speak English. I wasn't used to, obviously, like call to prayer, but it very quickly kind of sinks in, and you just, it's nice.
You get used to it.
Yeah, well, when you hear it and you're like, oh, it's later in the day, or it helps you keep track of your day. I think there are definitely cultural differences in Jerusalem that I've had to adjust to. The hospitality, though, is in the reverse way, is I never thought I would be so welcomed in to other people's lives and families, and people so freely sharing their stories. That's not something that you really come across in America. And I think if you'd ask the average American, they wouldn't expect to find themselves in the middle of a refugee camp in Palestine and never want to leave because of the warmth and the hospitality of the people, and the beauty of somebody being willing to share their culture with you is such an honor and privilege. So for me, it wasn't this cultural shock of, yeah, it's a little different in terms of what you're allowed to wear for clothing, but you get used to that. And I think in Jerusalem you see it all the time with people maybe coming from Tel Aviv. And now I notice it and I'm like, oh, those are very short. But those are little things. But in general, I think the overwhelming hospitality canceled out maybe some gaps.
That touched my heart, being from a refugee camp. That's really nice. As an American, what do you think of the various decisions of the Trump's administration that are biased to the Israeli policies, and how does that contribute to more violence in the region?
Yeah, I think Trump's policies have unfortunately continued American policies that haven't been balanced, that haven't been in the best interest of even the security that they speak of often, because it can invoke and provoke more frustration, which then in turn can be, demonstrated through violence. And I do think that my representatives and the politicians in America don't all understand what's going on here, and they haven't seen the reality on the ground. And it's not something that most Americans are either aware of or and maybe it's because of the circles that I'm in, but most people I know either don't know anything about it, so they're neutral, or they think they're bad decisions. You know, Trump unilaterally moving the capital, or recognizing that, is against international law, and I think international bodies should ignore the United States. And that's something that I have the freedom to say against my own government, but there are real people that are involved here, and people should not ever be used as pawns and in a political game. And I've had friends that say, well, don't you understand what the significance of this place is? Of course I do, to many people. And we can't dictate, we shouldn't, in other regions around the world, how special one place is to one group versus another. And yeah, I think in general our policies for a while have been really biased, not considering the people, all the people here, and his administration has just kind of continued that.
So what message would you like to deliver to the world, and specifically to Americans, about Palestine and Palestinians?
I mean, what I always tell people is you can't always believe one side, and certainly never believe another person's narrative about someone else, especially if they're not living together. If you don't know me, you can't tell my story, and I shouldn't trust that. I think that people should be very aware of the information that they consume and who they trust about information. And if they really don't trust anybody, come and see for themselves. Palestinians will show you who they truly are through their hospitality, and you'll end up just like I did in the middle of a restaurant with people singing and dancing and being exposed to beautiful culture that I think is hidden also behind the occupation. It's just hidden, and if you come and see for yourself, it takes 2 hours, and everything you ever thought you knew about this place is changed.
Nice, amazing. Yeah. Thank you very much, Celia.
Of course, thank you.
For being here. Thank you for also being part of our show.
Thank you.